graduate students to PhDs, I want to first emphasize that global reach in interprofessional practice and education is very much a deep part of our culture. So let me return to the title of my talk, Aligning Our Plans for Health Professions Education with the SDGs. Let me first highlight a couple of the things that I think are hot button issues for people like me in planning for health professions education. They relate to legacy versus accountability, delivering on the needs for a workforce, and then finally interprofessional education and collaborative practice. I'm going to say a few words about each one of those to make a couple of points. First of all, a reflection. Again, I come from a fairly privileged place in the United States. That's the basis of medical education. We went through a big revolution over 100 years ago in the United States with this man, Abraham Flexner, who came in and saw a lot of medical schools were not really, they were just shops. They weren't being that accountable. People were just passing along ideas. Often they weren't very scientifically based, all right? And they were just a product line. So that more uniformly arduous and expensive medical education is demanded. I think that's clearly going on to this day in the United States. It's certainly going on in this region. I think we need to invest in medical education if we want something different to happen. Another quote, medical education is not just a program for building knowledge and skills in its recipients. It's also an experience which creates attitudes and expectations. So we're not just shaping minds, we're shaping hearts. And that launched a whole movement in the United States. Some feel that the pendulum swung maybe a little bit too far in places, and that's the whole caring professions, care and delivery, judgment, wisdom, reflection. And those got lost on our journey through education preparation that we're trying to bring back right now. So it's very much a time when we're needing to look differently and think intentionally about medical education, because most of us tend to cling to our legacy systems. We do it this way because that's the way it was always done. And that's how somebody's going to hold us accountable. We're not big risk takers in medical education. By doing something different, we could damage our reputation. But now is a call for action as we try and make our education system more accountable. One way we can make them accountable is we've all changed our curriculum and approach to help people learn. You know, we used to come up with our legacy curriculums and we'd have our education objectives, our assessment. But we've all been talking now for a while about competency-based education, and we start with, what do people need? Have those really driven into what the competencies and outcomes are to satisfy those needs. How do we assess and know if they're there, and then how do we come up with a curriculum? But all too often our tendency is to spring back and to say, well, let's start with the curriculum. And we're not connecting that to the needs of society. And I'm not sure if you can see it on this one, but over here, our language of accountability has evolved to include milestones, entrustable professional activities. What can we trust a person to do? But this all boils down to if we're training people fit for purpose. Not the purpose of what we in the ivory tower say somebody should do, but what's society looking for? And we haven't had that strong of an orientation as we should. Going back to one of the other things I wanted to touch about when we think about the SDGs, there's a lot of talk about workforce numbers. We in education offices and in our schools are saying, well, what about the workforce? And often we're very disconnected from the workforce. I've all seen slides like this way too often, where you look at the places that are more economically advantaged, have quite a few health workers, and you get back to this part of the world, and things get quite a bit thin. One of the changes, though, and one of the issues that can be challenging when you look at the needs through this lens of a workforce, it presumes people are going to be providing care like they've always provided care. They're not necessarily being open to the new models of care, collaborative care, interprofessional work. And I think a lot of these numbers then become suspect. Yeah, that was based on a certain set of assumptions that we're all going to stay in our lane. We operate in our tribes, and we don't necessarily create synergistic purpose. The other thing that I think is troubling or challenging for us in the health professions is we're always trying to reconcile our value chain that is going through education in terms of how we're taking the needs, the demand. We've got this labor market up here that we're supposed to be producing, but then there's a whole health system that's pulling that. You can train all the doctors, the nurses, the pharmacists you want, but if somebody isn't going to hire them and put them into a system that allows them to do their best to add value, that's a challenge. So sometimes those of us in education, we're confined to working on a segment while being mindful. So trying to have this integration with how can we be informing, but how can we be transforming the health systems that we want our graduates, our learners to work. And to me, that's a key part of operational research, health systems research. It's a key part of what Flexner would have called for, evidence. Show us your designs and that you're making things better through new knowledge. So I've touched on these first two, legacy and accountability, delivering on the needs for a workforce. I'd like to just say a few more words about interprofessional education and collaborative practice. I've been really pleased to hear that that is a theme of this meeting. And in the United States right now, you don't find it as much of a theme as it needs to be. There are pockets of discussion around interprofessional education and collaboration, but you don't find a cross-cutting meeting like this where it's been one of the pillars of discussion. I think there's been a number of groups, the IPEC, actually trying to say, okay, what does fit for purpose mean when it comes to interprofessional education and practice? And actually defining what those competencies are. And I think we can be articulate about that. Educators sometimes will talk more in terms of ideology, the way the world should be, what I think is important and my values. But when we're talking about what we want people to do, it's often the language of competency, and I think we can be better at bringing these forward. I'm also very appreciative of this organization because they've taken, they started with what are some of the main groups that make up the health professions, but then when you look at it, at least for purposes of their organization, how do you define the health professions? It's extremely inclusive, and when we turn back to the SDGs, we're going to see it takes a village. You can't just take one cotter, a couple of folks here, put them together, and hope they do good work. So it's a very inclusive community that we need to see ourselves as professionals, as people who are committed to the advancement of the common good. If your schools are like mine, we're ending up training people to do certain things. The analogy here is if all you have is a hammer, everything tends to look like a nail. All right. So if you call in a gastroenterologist into a situation, a care situation, a research, we tend to look at that and say, well, this is my hammer. This is what I bring to the discussion. I think the promise and the beauty of interprofessional education is, you're teaching people to have other tools in their toolbox, but more importantly, you've got other people with other toolboxes that are coming in and are going to see things differently. I particularly get much more professional satisfaction out of working across professions because of the different ways people are seeing things and coming up with solutions. So back to my title. Aligning our plans for health professions education. Let's come back now to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we all are used to the demonstration of the goals. And the question for me is our role on the health professions and trying to educate the SDG movement as to their relevancy to most of our goals. A lot of times, when those people talk with us in the health professions about the SDG, we quickly go to SDG number 3, right? Where the SDG is good health and well-being, and it's been broken down into a number of the different metrics. And we say, yeah, 17 SDGs, that's our SDG. But the strong point I would like to make is I think we need to bring the conversation across the SDGs and to show that we as health professionals are not just IPE within ourselves, but IPE with all the other cohorts that are necessary to move the SDGs. It's hard to take any of these and not try to say where health professionals wouldn't be better at the table, trying to work on solutions. You know, so we're not just number 3. We all are deeply impacted by the role of better education and how that aligns with better health. Sometimes the best thing you can do for women in a community is to make sure they get good education. So how do we as health professionals participate in that discussion and advance that movement? For me at University of Michigan now, when we have our students and our learners going out and doing global health or have the privilege of being guests in this part of the world, I'd much rather have them out with people from other disciplines, because to take any one of these issues, you need to look at it from the different directions. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with a bunch of medical students and a bunch of hammers. But we have very vigorous discussions going on across our university where we've got health that is involved with climate, with environment. My talk now, just say a few concluding moments or comments about how I really think this time with the SDGs at the interface with places like the U.S. is particularly good. It's very important, I think, for the U.S. to be much more involved with these issues. One of the things that we're often trying to explain to people is sometimes we get lost in our terminology. What does global health mean? What's in, what's out? You know, the definition that we use is why does it, where you were born and lived tell so much about how your past, current, and future health matter. Unfortunately, in the United States, a lot of times people will take a picture, maybe out of this part of the world, and say, boy, poor desperate people. The pictures I'm using more and more are the same types of issues that you can find in the United States. So right north of me in Ann Arbor, Michigan, we had this horrendous lead poisoning that was due to our civil services letting the pipes erode, and we ended up with thousands and thousands of small children that were poisoned by lead. So huge issue, huge equity issue. So these are issues that are in all of our countries to varying degrees, but we really need to focus on that common question. Why should it matter where you're born and the conditions you were born into? Can't we get some kind of commonality to work on these problems then? We're very proud to host learners from Africa. To tell you the truth, I don't think the value proposition for them is coming to learn cardiology, learn radiology. It's learning systems. How are people connected? How do you get things done? What does your accountability look like to the people you're called on to serve? So it's more of a systems orientation. And I think there's a lot more opportunity for harmonization. Know that from my part of the world, there's tremendous interest in Africa. And I just want to end with a couple of slides that I use. The whole continent, it's just really inspiring. It's been a privilege for me to be part of the movement. I'm also appreciative whenever I come to this part of the world, the weaving, the weavers, the interconnectedness, and how you take different strands and turn them into things of beauty. And I think that's the lab bench for many of us from the north, that you can create value around, is how do you create interprofessional education and link that to collaborative care. I'm always very dubious of people who are trying to import examples that are from other places because they're usually from another time. I frankly think we need to have more to learn from Africa in terms of how we work together interprofessionally than you from us. There's another weaving, another set of strands I would love to see updated. When I was working with MEPI, we took a snapshot of what the MEPI schools looked like back in 2013. And you can see all these institutions that are becoming connected, woven together. Some of these have to do with within-country consortium and visits, but you can see a tapestry here. I would love to see this updated, all right? Because when you are trying to market your movement and tell people why should you be a part of it, why you and the University of Michigan are going to value, it's something along these lines. So I'm going to close, let's go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And I, for one, am very grateful that I've been invited to share with you the journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. AFREhealth conference. That is outside the frame. Also the idea of let the SDG people, as you say that, let them also engage with the health professions education people. But it means that we as health professions education people should engage the SDG people. Can we give Professor Koolhaas another round of applause? Professor Olusegun Akinika. He is a professor of pediatrics and he has a special interest in liver diseases. He is the former provost of the College of Medicine, University of Ibadan, and currently is the provost of the Edu University in Yambo. He also has a special interest in medical education. He has worked extensively on drug-drug interactions and drug-disease interactions. And his academic and research partnerships has cut across North America and Europe, and he has received several grants to aid his research. Professor Akinika, welcome.
The title of the discussion is The Future of Medical Education in Africa, Prospects and Challenges for Curriculum Development. The curriculum drives many things in terms of what we intend to achieve and how the achievement would help in propagating or reaching the goals of the SDGs. The curriculum, the competencies derived from the curriculum would help to interrogate many of the issues that can crystallize into a curriculum that will develop and achieve the goals of the SDG. We also intend to discuss how in interrogating the curriculum, the present set of curricula that we have across the continent, we would also be defining the challenges and the prospects, looking for strengths and weaknesses in order to develop the curriculum of the future. Thank you, Chairman and Co-Chair. First of all, we'll try to evaluate the challenges of medical education in Africa, and they include, but not limited to, ancient curriculum, poor updates in global changes in medical education, poor allocation of funds for acquisition of modern teaching technologies, fewer and fewer cases to teach. Yes, there are many cases. There's water everywhere, and yet there's no water to drink. Why this is the situation is that many of the patients, because we pay out of pocket, many of the patients will have gone to other areas. The church, the faith positions, the traditional healers before they come to us. And yet we will see them, but in extremes. So we don't see patients too many times in the very early phase of their illness. And then there's the issue of the poor utilization of information and communication technologies in the teaching of our students. Now we have this figure which shows the relationship between the education system and the health system. Both of them are so important to each other, but education must produce the template that will drive the attainment of the healthcare requirements. Now, yesterday evening, the last comment was about the food that we ate at lunch, which did not reflect the need for the growing population because we had so much protein, so much fat, so much carbohydrate. So based on this comment, I went on to search and added this. The Economist Intelligence Unit in 2012, in its report, The Future of Healthcare in Africa, stresses that the continent is confronting multiple epidemiological crises simultaneously. High levels of communicable and parasitic diseases are being matched by growing rates of chronic conditions. Although the communicable diseases such as malaria, tuberculosis, and above all HIV/AIDS are the best known. However, it is the chronic conditions such as obesity and heart diseases that are looming as a greater threat. These are expected to overtake communicable diseases as Africa's biggest challenge in 2030. Is the curriculum ready to take care of this looming challenge? Have we exited? Do we have a hope of moving from the communicable to the non-communicable diseases? Our curricula, the various curricula across the continent, address this issue of even the combination of chronic, non-communicable, and communicable diseases. Now, this is Nigeria looking at the Global Competitiveness Report of 2016-2017, in which there are 12 pillars. The Global Competitiveness Report is a publication of various multilateral agencies, the World Bank, the UNESCO, and so on and so forth. And then they have this set of 12 pillars that address many things in terms of competitiveness and measurement across various nations. The silver or the gray area there you can see, there is the African average. The bold blue line is Nigerian situation. Now, for pillars 4 and 5, which talk about health and education, these are the various indices utilized. Business impact of malaria, malaria incidence, HIV prevalence, infant mortality, life expectancy, and so on. Nigeria, unfortunately, came first from the rear. It's number 138 of the 138 countries evaluated. Then looking at higher education, with the indices listed such as quality of education, tertiary education, quality of management of schools, Nigeria's measurement was 125 out of the 138 countries. This calls for sober reflection and review of our curriculum. Now we then took the next step by reviewing the quality of graduates of Nigeria against other sub-Saharan medical schools as well as the international medical graduates. Utilizing, this is a report from the Foundation for the Advancement of International Medical Education and Research, FEMA for short. It takes a 10-year look of the first attempt pass rate of Nigeria's medical graduates in the United States physician workforce. When we look at the Nigeria is the one in yellow or orange. Then the next one is the Sub-Saharan Medical Schools graduates, and then the top one there is the International Medical Graduates. International Medical Graduates are people who train outside the United States. So essentially, over this 10-year period, Nigeria's graduates, in terms of the first attempt pass rate, in step 1, which is basic medical sciences, we performed significantly well compared with the other two groups. So we have done well in terms of basic sciences, basic medical sciences. Then step 2, same first attempt pass rate. This is Nigeria. The red one is international medical graduates. These are the expected people to provide the competencies that will drive the SDG. And then the middle one is a summary of, or the average of other sub-Saharan medical schools, which would also be part of the people to drive the SDG. You can see here that both groups fall below the international medical graduates. Now, this is the clinical skills. First attempt pass rate over 10 years. Nigeria and the other sub-Saharan medical schools do not or have not performed as well as the international medical graduates. Now, this is looking at the picture from the United Kingdom by way of first attempt pass rate at the membership of the Royal College of General Practice. Looking at clinical skills performance. What we have there is Egypt, which is also in Africa. The first attempt pass rate at the clinical skills examination in 2015-2016 session. The failure rate was 88% or 89%. In the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Nigeria, and so on and so forth. What we need to interrogate our curriculum to deliver what will drive us towards the attainment of the SDGs. Now, this is something much more sobering. When we look at the people struck off the register or suspended in the United Kingdom, Nigeria has, as of 2016, about 3,964 doctors working within the National Health Service. India has about 25,000. About 0.5% of Indian doctors get suspended or struck off the register. Egypt, fellow African, about 1.1%. And Nigeria about 0.8%. These are issues that should bother us as teachers in the service of humanity. Now, we then followed on in a study conducted in this country using 8 medical schools. We had a set of competencies, about 122 competencies, which we asked our students and teachers to discuss and answer anonymously through monkey survey. And the responses were graded as well and poorly. Now we ask the teachers and the students, to what extent do you teach? Or students were taught the following competencies: how to take good history. The teachers and the students agreed that we were taught well and we taught them well. Assess mental state. About 38% and 30% of teachers said we did not teach them well and we were not taught well. Assessing communicable disease, which is a problem here. About 43% of students said we were not taught well. Though only 17% of teachers said taught them well. How do we take care of emergencies? The same set of questions. To what extent do the teachers teach or students were taught how to recognize and assess acute medical emergencies? A third of the students said we were poorly taught, whereas the teachers said we taught them very well. How to provide first aid? 56% of the students said we were taught poorly, but only 5% of the teachers said we taught them poorly. And how to provide basic life support according to standard guidelines. A quarter of the students said we were not taught well, whereas 12% of teachers said, well, I agree with them. Now, in order to understand many of the situations in the UK, communication is one of the major problems that Nigerian graduates or foreign graduates have. How to communicate. And we then ask the students and the teachers to what extent do you teach how to break bad news. Bad news must come if you work in a hospital setting. 64% of students said we were taught poorly, and about a third of the teachers said, yes, we agree with them. And how to communicate with aggression, especially when you come in extremis or patients are brought in extremis. How do we communicate with them? They're human beings, they're agitated. About 67% of students said, these are graduating students. 2/3 of the students said we were taught poorly on how to handle this. And the teachers, significantly, 40% said, we agree, we did not teach this very well. Again, how to communicate on telephone. I think that is one major challenge healthcare providers have. How do we communicate with people that we see as supplicants, people who need us? And therefore, we don't have to be respectful to them when they call us on telephone. The issue is, how did you get my number? Why should you be talking to me? Who are you? But that's the reality. These are things that we need to take charge in our curriculum revision. And how to do the same thing here, management plans, and so on and so forth. So in these two publications in which the European Union and the African Union supported, in which I'm the editor of one, the last one there is the 2018 publication concerning design of degree programs in medicine. It's a 180-page situation report. Now, this is the situation for Africa. The totality of Africa, there were about 15 or 18 medical schools involved, all across the regions of Africa. The black line simply says this is the extent to which we want these competencies to be achieved. And the pink line simply shows the level of attainment of these competencies. These are African medical schools from north to south, from east to west and central. You can see how far, from the employer's point of view, from the student's point of view, the graduate's point of view, and academics' point of view, all of us were far from the ideal. Then we looked at the Lancet Commission's report. Frank led the team in the Lancet Commission's report, and then he stated, among other things, professional education has not kept pace with challenges, likely because of fragmented, outdated, and static curricula that produce ill-equipped graduates. The problems are systemic: mismatch of competencies to patient and population needs, poor teamwork, and narrow technical focus. Therefore, we believe that these findings in these various studies can be one of the bases for curriculum revision. And that there's a need to shift away from the traditional science-based, content-based curriculum to a much more contemporary curriculum of competency-based curriculum. I'm happy my earlier colleague has spoken extensively on competency-based curriculum. Then the university where I am now, we also started in 2018. The other institutions still operate in science-based curriculum, which is about 40, 50 years old. Some particular areas that should interest us, apart from the curriculum, is the fact that we need to work on interprofessional and multidisciplinary education. We work in science. This is just that, okay, most medical schools in the United States operate a system-based education. It's competency-based generally, and then this is just the Lancet Commission report of 2010, which is just about interprofessional education, in which all teams work together: the American College of Nursing, Association of Pharmacy, Voice of Dental People, American Association of Medical Colleges, and so on and so forth. We need to move away from the silo mentality. Now, how do we modify the learning environment? We need to be much more technologically enhanced. We, in situations, and I think about, I'm sure in Lagos and the Edo University where I am now, have the power lab systems for teaching practical schools is adequate. Both the teachers and the students are not sure exactly what to say. Whether it's bad, because 50-50, essentially. We also asked them, do they think central examination will enhance the quality of graduates of medical schools? The students said sure in about 3/4 of cases, but the teachers are not too equivocal. And then we finally asked, do they think that all medical schools in Nigeria should undertake central examination at all levels? The teachers said no. The students are not too sure. Everybody talked about the challenges of making it not to happen. I looked at the challenges, but not looking at whether they have benefits. There are several countries that operate central exit examination. And I'm sure that, I know Cameroon does an exit examination, but I'm not sure whether many other countries in Africa go through this system. There are conclusions and the future. We believe that for the curriculum to achieve the appropriate competencies needed for our healthcare delivery and administration, it must be modified towards global trend. Like I said, we're about 18 or so countries and universities in the consortium in which we lead, which I lead. I think only Ibadan, as at the time we were writing this report, we started from 2011 to 2018. I think Ibadan and UCT, University of Cape Town, have modified their curriculum. Later, Lagos, then Edo University, but all the other members are still within the traditional curriculum. We need to ensure interprofessional and multidisciplinarity in education of health professionals so that we can all work together towards achieving, and this should be within the curriculum. We need to modify the learning environment to meet the demands of the revised curriculum through hybrid of the traditional opportunistic bedside clinical skills acquisition and technology-enhanced learning. We must integrate information and communication technology into our training programs, and then we must
put up your hands. Oh, let's go through. So, thank you, well, that you came over here, and we're looking forward to it.
As you just heard, I've been in my current role about 3 years. In the last 18 months, I think this is my 4th trip to Africa. And I found that each trip coming here gets better and better, both in terms of what I'm learning, and the progress that's been made just in the last couple of years with AFREhealth. So I'm very optimistic in terms of the future. So what I'm going to do this morning, and I'll try to go through this pretty quickly to be able to have time for questions and discussion. Do a quick overview of ECFMG and FAMER. It's been really great to see a lot of FAMER fellows here at the conference and to see how their careers have progressed since their fellowship time. And then I'm going to talk about something that I think fits very well in follow-up to the two prior speakers, as they, in a sense, have done a diagnosis and plan treatment plans for the improvement of medical education. And I'm going to talk about something that I think is a catalyst. It's the enzyme that will be able to bring success to this, and that's the global accreditation of medical schools. And I'll talk about our vision for ECFMG in terms of how we're applying it locally, meaning in the United States, but more importantly, how I think it can be applied internationally, and then try to tie together how quality education really equals quality healthcare. So a little bit about ECFMG and FAMER. We're two separate organizations that functionally operate as one. As you heard, I'm the CEO of ECFMG, but I'm also the board chair for FAMER. We're both nonprofit, non-governmental organizations based in Philadelphia in the States. And we do work together in partnership with the goals and the vision to promote quality medical education and healthcare worldwide. We feel we are experts being discussed when you're on the program. Also, we have expertise in the recognition of authenticity of physician credentials. And that's a skill that we've been employing for about 60 years, over 60 years in the United States. But now we work with 18 other countries through their medical regulatory offices in that extent. And then we have research, we do research and study the migration of physicians around the world, including the U.S. workforce, but others as well. So we're known for the ECFMG certification, as I just discussed. We do verification services for 18 other countries. We're involved in the delivery of the clinical skills exam. We heard some data on that this morning as well, in conjunction with the National Board of Medical Examiners and the United States Medical Licensing Exam. And then we have programs to support international medical graduates who are interested in graduate medical education. With FAMER, FAMER is well known for its Philadelphia Institute, which is a competitive process to be able to enroll to help young and developing faculty members of medical schools and other healthcare schools. So it really is interprofessional. Achieve skills that will help them in their success as educators in improving medical and healthcare education. The research that we heard about as well. And then we have data resources on medical education around the world. And I'll mention briefly in a little bit about the World Directory of Medical Schools. Currently, the FAMER Institutes, and the regional FAMER Institutes really are key, I think, in meeting the goals of improving medical education worldwide. In Africa, currently we have two FAMER regional institutes, one in the south, SAFRE, and then a newer one in Egypt that has opened recently. And from my perspective, we're always looking for opportunities for additional FAMER regional institutes. But there are 11 institutes worldwide. The FAMA research activities are listed on this slide, which includes looking at the international migration of physicians, and we're proud to work with the WHO on several initiatives as we look at that. International physicians in the United States and their workforces. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're very interested in working with and helping to improve medical education programs worldwide. So this brings me to the catalyst, to the enzyme that I think makes all of this work, and that's accreditation. And I realize that accreditation is a word, is a term, is something that we're very used to in the United States. We're very comfortable with this, and not necessarily so worldwide. But we feel it's a very important process in terms of harmonizing. So one way to look at accreditation is that it's a process by which a designated authority, so when we're talking about medical schools, an accredited body for medical school, where one would review and evaluate an educational institution or a program within an institution against a clearly defined set of standards. So the measurement is against a set of standards, not against other schools or other programs, but against a set of standards. So why is accreditation important? And what are the components of accreditation to start with? First of all, there's a self-assessment part of that. I think we all know from the work that we do, if we can take a step back and look at exactly what our processes are and what the outcomes are, it helps us do a better job. And then there's external review. This is sort of an external quality assurance where peers can assess how we are performing against a set of standards and are we meeting the goals of our institutions. And most importantly, when we're talking about healthcare, it's public accreditation with medical schools. Well, it's interesting that there's quite a bit of variability, not surprisingly, across the world in terms of accreditation and how standards are applied. There are at least 170 plus countries and territories who are currently operating medical schools. And over 100 countries have accreditation agencies. And in fact, some countries have more than one accreditation agency. And accreditation is important because truly medicine is globalized. The migration of students for medical education. We were proud to host a workshop earlier this morning about our GEMX student exchange program that has involved medical students, nursing students, and pharmacy students to date, and we're about to launch an interprofessional education student exchange program with that. And so it's important that students, as they come together and do exchanges, are coming from similar curricula in terms of meeting standards. And then there's migration of physicians across borders to fill the demand for healthcare providers around the world, and unfortunately, in many situations, to escape conflict areas. And as I mentioned earlier, we're proud to be working with WHO and with their. One of the other issues that's really important in terms of accreditation is the amazing proliferation of medical schools over the last decades, as this slide demonstrates. A large number of proprietary, what we would term for-profit medical schools. And so that's another issue why accreditation is important. Then, unfortunately, at ECFMG, through our work of certification of graduates, we've uncovered that there are a number, we've uncovered a small number, but you know, when you look under a rock, you find some things, but it probably means there's many more. Schools that we would deem to have questionable practices. And in fact, what you see as a medical school may not be what's really there. And that's an issue for students who want to become physicians. It's an issue for the public in terms of what happens with the students that do graduate. There are all kinds of different issues with these schools, which includes altering transcripts. Sometimes they're a front for some sort of illegal activity. There are some sort of diploma mills out there that sell degrees, operating outside the direction of the country where they're located, and for sure a lot of false advertising, which brings us back to the accreditation issue in terms of how we can help students and others know what is up. It is not possible, obviously, for one agency to accredit medical schools worldwide. There's a whole host of reasons. One of the more important ones is the cultural differences among countries and within countries, where even with harmonized standards, it's the application of the standards that are very important. However, there still needs to be a global standard, so we have expectations of what the education is. So the solution that we're working with and are excited to be part of and to see the great momentum that's growing around the world is working to recognize accredited agencies. So instead of accredited medical schools, go up one level to the accrediting agencies. So we've been working with the World Federation of Medical Education, and I'm pleased to be on the Executive Council of WFME as we take this over. And one of the criteria, or I guess really one of the driving forces for this accreditation processes is something that is a domestic issue in the United States, where our board announced in 2010 that by 2023 we will only accept graduates of medical schools for international medical schools for certification if they graduated from an accredited school where the accrediting body has been recognized to be doing a proper job. So that's a domestic issue in the United States. In the last 3 years, as I've been working with ECFMG and FAMA and talking to groups like this about accreditation, the accreditation, actually, the 2023 policy we have, I think it is a driving force beyond the U.S. borders. It is more important in helping to harmonize standards and improve medical education throughout the world, and in fact has stimulated an international accreditation effort. And it is promoting universally accepted standards that we believe will enhance the quality of medical practice as we assure the public and protect the public with their health care. And other groups are supporting this. WHO in 2015 came out with their strategy on human resources for health that includes the accreditation of healthcare educational institutes. In 2016, IAMRA, which is the International Association of Medical Regulatory Authorities, came out with their support of accreditation. The World Medical Association has done that. And then most recently, just as an example, in Israel, they've come out with an announcement of they're only seeking physicians from accredited medical schools. So this process is going to be implemented over the next few years. And what I want to stress with this is the amount of information that we're putting out, both on our website as well as on the World Directory of Medical Schools that we co-sponsor along with the World Federation of Medical Education. And we're posting information about guidance on selecting a medical school, what sort of things to look for, linked to WFME. We started doing that last year. By next year, in 2020, we'll have a listing of medical schools that are accredited by an agency that has already been recognized by WFME. In 21, we'll have physician reports to residency programs, to junior doctor programs around the world in the United States that will go into our state boards, as well as other licensing authorities with whom we work on the verification of credentials. And then finally, in 2023 is when we will be looking primarily for graduates of accredited medical schools. So what we're hearing around the world as we travel and talk about this is that people are finding this as an important way to drive quality in their medical education as harmonized standards, or standards are harmonized around the world. And just to show you that it's not necessarily a U.S.-centric activity, there are many countries out there that are striving for this recognition, even though they send few graduates to the United States for further training. And we've had the opportunity to talk about this at many conferences like this. We're involved in a conference in April in Seoul, South Korea, where there are over 1,000 people in attendance to learn about accreditation and recognition. And I'll just remind you, as I remind myself and others, what we're talking about is an issue that is ultimately about the patients. As we talk about different techniques of medical education and assessment, what's really important is how does all of this affect the patients? It leads to better care, better doctors, and better care. And so when we look at that, just from a graphic perspective, what accreditation can do, basically, is create a rising tide that lifts all boats. And again, we think this is very positive for the world communities in terms of healthcare. And I'm going to end on an ad that we're partnering with the World Health Organization and the Global Healthcare Workers Network. We have organized and are sponsoring a symposium in December in Istanbul to go over and to discuss issues of accreditation and regulation and how that improves healthcare. Thank you very much.
Very thoughtful discussion and about lessons that can be applied outside of medical education to all other health education fields as well. So I think that was very inspiring. Thank you. I need to thank our speakers as well for giving us time to have question and answers so that we can break for tea on time. For those of you that know from the Durban conference, you know I'm very much about keeping to time. So I'm going to ask that you raise your hands please for any questions that you might have for our speakers, and that you keep your questions and comments brief, and then so we can get a lot more questions into the session, into the time that's left. So do I see anybody? I see one hand there.
My question is to everyone actually. Two things. One is, to what extent are these curriculum revisions being extended beyond the medical education? So there's obviously lots going on in relation to medicine, but what about nursing and the other health professions? And to what extent are we doing that? The second is, we're looking to the future workforce, but there's also a large body of the existing workforce who may also be deficient in some of these areas, and how do we address that? Thank you.
To all the panel, including the co-chairs, we have a lot of was really enhanced by MEPI and NEPI. How do we make sure that we use these resources across our region? And for example, during MEPI, competence-based medical education was really developed at Makerere University and University of Ibadan. Just to mention a few, how do we make sure that we don't lose the gains and successes of MEPI and this South-to-South collaboration?
I think that we are talking mainly about medical health care here, because as to what health actually means today, we don't seem to be addressing that very keenly. And I want to send this to Professor Nika, and I think the third presenter actually touched on this very well, Professor Bisky. That issue of curriculum approach. What kind of curriculum am I using? Is it a content-based or competence-based? In one country, Nigeria, is there no authority that tends to drive that process, or schools are left to do it the way they like? Thank you very much.
The countries here in Africa. We're going to have a session at 10:30 of the board group on a curriculum that we have developed over the course of the last 10 years in terms of how physicians can be trained to become better physicians not only passing the USMLE, but actually becoming more competent physicians. And the question is, with that kind of opportunity, how is that translated into change in terms of the large needs that are found here in Africa?
Across many of these questions, and I can tell you that this process of the recognition of the agencies as a process to improve medical school education is incredibly difficult, and has been quite a lot of work by WIFME, WFME, in developing these standards and then going through the process. And I think, as I participated in a workforce conference at WHO about 18 months ago, and a question came up, as healthcare workers cross borders, how does the receiving country, do those communities know what these people are capable of? Get back to that question of accreditation. And when we're talking about other healthcare professionals, nurses, pharmacists, physical therapists, etc., I think accreditation should be looked at in all those areas as well. But I would guess, given that large segment, that's going to be even more difficult to do than the medical schools themselves.
The view from a dean's office in that kind of school. But I again wanted to emphasize that bringing in the other health professions has been very critical for us. At least the way we've approached it at our school is we have common blocks where the students can all come together and the teachers can come together. So often, the medical schools plan their own program, the nursing school, pharmacy, and there's no shared time for IPE. So if you don't design a structure that's going to enable those types of activities, you're just talking in aspirational tones. You've got to design it for collaboration. The last thing I'll say is often we talk a lot about curriculum. I was very impressed with the survey data from my colleague. A lot of times we are asking people, well, what's the teaching plan? What have you been taught? And probably our best questions are trying to figure out, well, what are you learning? And what do we want them to learn? And sometimes we overemphasize the power of the fact that, well, if we've written it down in the curriculum, therefore it's learned. And at least in my culture, there's a big gap there.
The other professions buying into competency-based curriculum, I think it will take time. The medical profession itself, the MBBS profession, also has not even fully bought into the program. I think for now in Nigeria we have only 3 institutions in the competency-based curriculum program, whereas the others are still aspiring and some have not thought about this. The issue whether there's a central body, yes. When we had the tuning and harmonization strategy for higher education in Africa, which is an EU, European Union and African funded program, we've had over 15 international meetings and we've written our reports crystallizing those 2 books for medicine. Our duty is to go back to our regulatory agencies and try to convince them about the need that this is what the African Union would like in terms of competency-based education. And I must emphasize one thing. The competency-based education is not only for medicine or healthcare professions. It's all about other professions across geology, applied geology, teacher education, and so on and so forth. Yes, each person is supposed to go back to his regulatory agency and convince them about the uptake. Secondly, and I think that's the most important issue here, the bunker mentality. People will not want to yield any ground whatsoever to another profession to dictate what it does. At least I can say confidently here. Yes, I can cite specific examples in which we asked histopathologists to be involved in the teaching of some aspects in another profession? And they said no. We asked public health specialists to teach public health in another healthcare profession. They said no. We will teach what we will teach. So the fundamental problem is the bunker mentality. Stay within your silo, I will stay within my silo, and I think it will take time for us to bridge this problem. And for Nigerians, I'm sure it's the same for Africa, the continuing suspicion between the professions is a negative factor in the profession, is a negative factor in the progression of inter-professional education collaborations.
Before we go, there may be some housekeeping that will need to be done. Thank you all very much. Can we have round thank you also to my co-chair.
Thank you very much, and we're very grateful that this session has gone on and we have a little time to spare. Go up the stairs and you find the room there. That's where the session will take place. And also during lunchtime, we hope the TWGs that we had during the NEPI time, interprofessional education, take-based learning, curriculum, competencies, community-based learning, and co. We'll find time to network going on, where we sit together, and Susan or Clara would coordinate this, and we'll get the various lists out. So for now, it's time for tea, and then thereafter the breakout session. Thank you very much. Enjoy it.
Which one did they give you? Sorry, the hard part. When are you going to? Is this? Oh, today, yeah.